way back about a month ago, I put a controversial post on LinkedIn saying something along the lines as does code not matter? And I'm telling you, there's a lot of feedback both ways. But here's my perspective. If I'm a senior engineer and I have a team of junior engineers, real people, not agents, real people, I may look at some of the code just to see if Joe or Sally, knows what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, what I'm end up doing more often than not is I'm looking at pull requests to actually, when they're done their job, I will look at, I may do a code review or something like that. So even today, if you're a senior software engineer, you're not looking at all the code in any depth. You're looking at slices of it. Here's what I found though, is with the speed at which I'm doing this, by the time I were to actually look at the code, do a revision, I could just ask Claude Code or Codex, is what you've developed architecturally sound? And would you actually decompose this a little bit differently? And I get an honest answer and it starts to fix it up.
Okay, good morning, Eric. I'm looking forward to the next few topics on our podcast because we are going to be addressing a lot of what is changing quickly in our industry. And today it's all about coding agents. Now, as we think about our experiences with coding agents, we've got a great cross section of ideas we want to share. And I'm thinking of one of those stealth projects. You're probably thinking about that and some others. Teach me, where should we take this conversation to get people up to speed and how we're thinking about coding agents?
Sure. Well, I think I think we got to anchor it on our experience. So that
Yes.
stealth project, I think, is kind of the anchor point. Because I
Right.
think there's a whole ton of lessons that we've learned along the way. So
Yeah.
we'll give a brief description, obviously, but I think
Yeah.
the general gist of this is our experience with coding agents and what works and what does not. So that we can hopefully impart a few lessons learned to the
Okay.
audience. Maybe they won't make the same mistakes, or maybe they'll
Yeah.
learn
Yeah.
faster than us.
Okay. So let's do it round robin style. I'll do one, you do one. I've got one on the tip of my tongue. Do you mind if I start?
Well, maybe describe the scenario or our stealth project first, and then we'll go.
Okay. Well, so the first example is actually something that happened this weekend. I want to share
Sure.
one of the most conclusive experiments I've run recently, which is the way to learn about coding agents is to use coding agents. So I want to plug this at the beginning of the podcast that regardless of your age, you should, or people should consider very seriously going to a hackathon because when you're forced to write code in 6 hours or 8 hours, you actually realize that without coding agents, you're going to lose the competition. And so I just think that having invited a friend in for the weekend and going to a hackathon, it changed his view on coding agents forever. And if people are trying to understand where the state of the art is, you should go to a hackathon in in your hometown. And if you don't have one, we'll bring one to you. But I just think that learning by doing is the new mantra with AI, and it's never been more true than with coding agents. So that's what I wanted to start with. Maybe it should have been at the end, but I just feel so I think it's so important that so many people I work with understand that AI is changing everything, understand that coding agents are doing things, understanding that coding agents aren't perfect and they have a, a vast number of opinions, and especially as it affects them and or me in my job. So I think one of the cures for that ailment is to use them and actually start to use coding agents. And so that's what I wanted to start the episode with. And then we can go back and forth and talk about things we've learned based on our experience with coding agents. So that's my opening plug.
Okay. Well, let me just I want to kind of just let me set the stage for that also. Some of
Yeah.
our my experience more. I think both of our experience, but I felt this actually rather acutely. So, as you know, with our stealth project, we started quite a while ago.
Yep.
And this is before the age of really good coding agents. So, this is the age where, again, this is 9 to 12 months ago, where they could do parts of code reasonably well, but they would get lost very quickly and very easily. Things took a long time, and we dare not ever expose these things to a business user because, quite frankly, a business user would get lost. They wouldn't be able to do anything, and the experience would be not terribly positive. Everything changed December, January 2026, a few short months ago.
Yeah.
And now what was impossible is now practical. We actually gave the starting point for an app to a business user, and they were using Claude Code, but I'm sure you could do this with Codex and others. But they created an entire they flushed out the app to something that was an just incredible app that demonstrated not just a slice of functionality that we were able to do 9 months ago, but literally 80% of the functionality of a major set of capability in the financial services industry. So it's complex, it was big, and you know what? They were able to do an incredible job getting something that not only looks great, but works. Now,
Yeah.
there's more to be done, but that's part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So I remember us talking about it with our customer last August and saying, "Hey, have you considered recording the interviews and recording our conversations? Because there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of things discussed in a conversation in a meeting." And everybody said, "Oh, well, of course, we transcribe all of our meetings." And everybody said that to me 2 years ago. They say, "Oh, of course, we transcribe." But do you use those transcripts and actually try to process them and isolate concepts or policies, or do you just feed them into an LLM and ask it to summarize? Well, almost everybody does that now, and here in April of 2026. But maybe you're doing that, but maybe you're not thinking of doing that with your coding agent. And that is what the business user started to do. He said, "Show me how to use this thing you guys are using and let me figure out if I can use it for anything useful." And he started talking to it. And then he realized it could listen to him endlessly. It would write everything down. It became his interviewer. It became the extension of him as a product manager. That changed everything. So I remember when we woke up one day in March, I think it was early March, and this person sent us a 180-page document, and we're like, "My God, what have you done?" And what he had done is spent days with Claude Code and had those conversations archived, put into a document, and really decompose the solution he wanted us to build in his language. And that was mind blowing. And I think that idea that your CEO, your CMO, anybody, your board member, your most junior employee can actually bring an idea and shape it with their interaction with AI so that thus other people can understand what that person is saying. This is the one of the features of all product development now. And so if you're building solutions that aren't AI native like this, you're probably missing a trick. And that's what blew us away about a month ago. And it was just remarkable.
Yeah. So clearly, what we're going to talk about today, John, is based off of very real world practical
Yeah.
experience. So let's start with what works well. So
Yes.
tell me
Okay.
about your hackathon experience. Tell me what worked. And then we'll go through our stealth project.
The hackathon, what it does is it forces you to move quickly, right? And we came up with an expression by the end of it. Because the person that I brought was an engineer, a software engineer, a data engineer, and who used AI lightly. And by the end of it, we said, you've got to treat the AI as a YOLO engineering project, right? You only live once. You don't even look at the code. What he was doing is he was getting the AI to generate some code. Hey, integrate with this. Make sure that the this does that. And he was looking at the code that was generated. And what a lot of people started with with these agents 6 months ago, they would look at the code. They would say, "Oh, that doesn't work," instead of saying, "Have you tested the code? Can you test the code for me?" And when he realized that he didn't have to look at the code anymore, he could just talk to Claude Code and tell it to look at the code and run some tests and look for this particular edge case that he knows always happens. He realized, oh, I'm not looking at a line of code anymore. That was mind blowing for him because he never thought he would ever get to that point. And it took one hackathon to realize, holy cow, I can do things I didn't even dream of if I just ask it to check my logic and do that sort of thing. So that I think that was one of the big learnings for him was, this theory. Theory's too strong a word, but it's YOLO engineering where if you don't try it, you only live once. So see what it could do. And don't deploy it, don't make it a production app, but listen, if you're gonna learn, you better try some stuff that you never thought it could do. And so that and this is kind of an obvious lesson that we all talk about, but I think if you're forced into a time window where you only have 4 hours to finish the code, it really the time constraint helps.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few things I'm gonna kinda, elevate out of that,
Yeah.
experience. And this is I'll weave in a little bit of my experience with
Yeah, yeah.
the stealth project. So what does it do well? It is outstanding. It is better than I have ever been, and it is better than I think I will ever be, and it is better than any other software engineer of any skill level that I've ever seen in building small to modest size apps fast.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I say small to modest, I don't mean like trivial. I'm talking about that 188 page spec put into a working app with tons and tons of functionality. So when I say small to modest, I don't mean trivial. What I mean is there's more to an app than just the user interface and that initial code. So I'm going to kind of characterize a little bit, but we were able to do that is it before the coding ages? This would take 3 months and a whole raft of effort. We'd only take a small slice of the functionality. Now we did it all, and we did it all in a short period of time, and we handed it off to the business users, and they were able to create something fast. So you can do things 10x faster, to use that term. I don't know if it's actually 10x, but it's a lot faster than you ever were able to do it before. I don't care your skill level.
Yeah.
That iteration allows you to improve outcomes. If you can iterate faster, you're going to get feedback faster, and you can actually provide a better quality product, something that may be more realistic. The scope is bigger. Maybe it does things better, but you can do it faster and the outcomes are better because the iteration cycle is not a week. It's like an hour, maybe 5 minutes before you can craft a new capability. That lets us have smaller teams. Smaller
Yeah.
teams, if they're skilled, can cover more ground. Example, I was able to get from the 188 page spec, I was able to get an app, a functional app that had probably 80% of the functionality, but it lacked the judgment that a business user would have. It had a lot of technical bells and whistles, but lacked the business judgment. The
Yep.
smaller part, when we hand it off to the business user, that's the business part of the team. So we had tech and business. That person was able to put all the real bells and whistles, added the judgment to it, so it actually was a financial services app as opposed to a technical app dressed as a financial services app. So small teams can cover a ton of ground, but you need the right skills. We'll talk about that in a second. And the last thing, which I think I heard you say, is for your colleague that you brought to the hackathon, these agents can radically accelerate learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, these are some of the things I've thought, but I mean, does that resonate
Yeah.
to you?
Yeah, yeah, and I notice, we're talking in paragraphs and, instead of, a back and forth, because, and I know and I say this with, grace because I think what we are exhibiting is our excitement with this new capability, and honestly, I couldn't stop talking about it. I wanted to get every point out, and what I like about our discussions, Eric, is when we say, well, I'll make a point and then I'll challenge it or I'll explore it. So, for the listeners, I think we've got the high energy, high octane love affair with AI done. And let's pick on one of these concepts and enjoy it, sink our teeth into it. Now, we could do the learning one, or we could talk about any number of those. So let me offer you the option to pick a topic you want to drill into.
Yeah, well, here's one thing that I think I didn't mention, but I thought you had a very intriguing point. Now, I do want to drill down into it. So,
Okay.
your colleague, you said he started by looking at the code and wanting to
Yeah.
see what it did,
Yeah.
and and the phrase you mentioned, I think, is very intriguing, and I want you to elaborate on this.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
you said maybe the code doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
what that meant.
It came from in a workshop I attended in January at the Internet Archive. There was a manager saying, "Hey, I've been coding in Rust for 3 months. I don't even know how to write in Rust. I've never looked at Rust." And that's when I thought, wait, how can this guy who is teaching all of the greats and the good engineers at the Internet Archive, and we're supposed to listen to him say that. He's never looked at a line of Rust, and that's all he codes in now. And I think it takes you a while to process what that means for you and how you think about it. And I have but that's what I mean. It might not matter anymore, if you know the syntax for the fanciest programming language. And I think that's what everybody is waking up to, whether it's the engineering manager from Slack or the whomever it is, we're all starting to wake up and say, "Wait a second, is the code important?" And let me pause so you can jump in on that and add any flavor to that you want, because I'm glad you did pick that out because it's actually just a mind blowing point. Should I go on about it, or do you have more to ask about it?
I got a few ideas, and I want to get your
Okay.
feedback
Yeah,
on
yeah,
this
yeah.
because I think I think it's actually super duper important.
Yeah,
Because I
it
do
is.
because I did way back about a month ago, I put a controversial post on LinkedIn saying something along the lines as, "Does code not matter?" And I'm telling you, there's a lot of feedback both ways. But here's my perspective, is what you're showing and what your experience is and your colleagues' experience is the same thing that if I'm a senior engineer and I have a team of junior engineers, real people, not agents, real people, I may look at some of the code just to see if Joe or Sally, knows what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, what I'm end up doing more often than not is I'm looking at pull requests to actually, when they're done their job, I will look at, I may do a code review or something like that. So even today, if you're a senior software engineer, you're not looking at all the code in any depth. You're looking at slices of it. Here's what I found though, is with the speed at which I'm doing this, by the time I were to actually look at the code, do a revision, I could just ask Claude Code or Codex, both are weapons in my arsenal. I just go and ask the thing and say, "Is what you've developed architecturally sound? And would you actually decompose this a little bit differently?" And I get an honest answer, and it starts to fix it up. What happened, though, is the very first few times I did this, I did look at the code. What I found is that it's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah.
There's a few telltale hints that we'll talk about that later around what may not work as well. But for the most part, I found that actually it was a better coder than I was
Yeah.
90% of the time. And I get to the point where now I've never, ever looked at a UX hunk of TypeScript code. And rarely now do I even look at server side code in Python, for example, or Fast API. That's the change. And I want to get your perspective on that. Is that where your head's at? What you're seeing?
Well, okay. So I'm glad we're drilling into this because this goes back to the only important thing in AI is trust. Okay. That's the hypothesis here. And we have learned to trust that the coding agent's skills, and I didn't mean to use that term, but its abilities actually have become trusted by a more senior person. This is how it typically works in an engineering team. Once you would trust that junior engineer can write code in TypeScript or what have you, they've proven it to you. And so you need to do less and less supervision. And so I think this thread that we're seeing in the coding side is we are learning to trust agents for certain tasks. And this obviously links back to everything we've said about enterprise agents, but it's the trust. And when you see the world's best engineers trusting, you start to question, well, why don't I trust? And I think we should all, if we're senior engineers and we've ever cared about craftsmanship, I think we should look. We should look once, twice, as many times as you want. And then you need to understand what you can trust it to do and what you can't, and draw your own boundaries. But you need to start to delegate the trust for certain things to the agents. And I think that's one of the key points I wanted to make.
You know, the analogy we always come back to an analogy to treat agents like employees in some respects, and I know it only goes so
Yeah.
far. But here's the
Well,
thing:
you manage
is
them like employees, right?
yeah, but here's that's exactly my point. Is what you've said is exactly the same advice I would give to another senior engineer around. Eventually, you got to trust the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same idea. So I think that's a crucial point. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Well, so I want to give another example of trust. So, and somebody made it just a few days ago, and I'm like, oh, of course. We don't question whether the compiler is creating the right assembly code. We have learned as engineers that compilers are deterministic and they will get it right because we've got decades of experience with compilers. If you don't know what a compiler is, I won't explain it here, but it trans- translates one language down closer to the hardware. So, is the agent the new concept compiler? and and how do we think of it? I think that compiler analogy really worked for me as well because I think it reinforces this idea that over time we learn to trust the systems that we've built or the tools that we've built, and we build tools on top of those tools, and then we build tools on top of those tools. And I think this progression of leveling up and adding layers, once we've trusted the layers below us, we can keep rising up to higher and higher levels of abstraction and ability. So I'm going to stop talking, stop generating. But yeah,
Well, so I think this is actually a good launching point. So we've talked about what works really well,
yes,
and I
yeah,
wanna we're gonna talk about what challenges there still may be, but, before we do that,
yeah, yeah,
what we're gonna say may sound a little negative. It's not meant to be. Take it as a lesson that you can learn from, because here's the bottom line for me anyway, is I love these agents. I trust them more and more every day, and I can't see myself being as productive as I am today using without those agents. To me, these are a normal fact of life in how I do my work every single day, and I'm not going back. So these things are fantastic and they deliver incredible productivity enhancements. But like any tool,
Yeah.
if I have a hammer and a nail, I can still make a really poor cabinet. I may even hurt myself with the hammer. So you still need to learn a little bit around what these tools are really good for, but what they may need a little bit of help with. So let's start talking about what you may need to think about. And I'm going to ask you for one feedback. I'll start this, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you tell me where you want to go. But the thing we found with our stealth project, and I kind of hinted at it. So I did the first cut, and we handed over to our colleague, the business expert, and the phrase I used is judgment matters. Taste matters, I think, is the other phrase I've heard a few times. Um, Tell me what you think about that in our experience with the stealth project.
Well, I could take it two different ways. I could say, YOLO, Eric, let go. Let go, my friend. It's going to be okay. Even if it breaks, even if the business user says, "Hey, I," and he actually did. Didn't he add a couple of buttons on the left side? And they were like grotesque to a designer. You would say, "Oh my God, why did you have a," what did he call it? Plumbing or something? And then he had all kinds of screens. And what I loved about that, and it is both, sure, he doesn't have the judgment or taste yet that a craftsman would have. But the fact that he did it was partly, it was a
Well,
great joy to me. But
yeah.
I don't know if that's what you were referring to
No,
around
I
judgment.
want to clarify. I want to put this really straightforward. I was the technical dude trying to shoehorn my limited knowledge of this financial services domain into an app. My
Yes.
judgment on the business domain was lacking. And when we handed it over to
Ah,
him, his judgment, his taste, his good
ah,
judgment, his good taste brought it to a completely new level that I never would have actually been able to do.
Well, that
So,
was another
judgment,
positive. Yes. So you put the judgment for the business with the business. Brilliant. That's an even better point than I was I was making. I just remember the discussion we had where it's like, we're gonna let the business user create Docker containers and like, so I use the agent to create a condescending series of instructions for the business user. Hey, financial dude, you probably never used your laptop. You probably don't know what a terminal is. And so it forced him to go start up a terminal and do all of this stuff. And what amazed me, and that's what's so exciting about this, is that everybody can learn how to be use Docker containers and NPM and all these random things that engineers have known about and that have created in their secret guild. And it's not because they don't want everybody to have the power, but they were worried that we'll cut ourselves, that we'll hurt ourselves. And now, when business users can do all of this, it really changes everything that he now can use his computer in a way that he never thought possible. Like, I know I'm jumping around with these points, but it was such a fascinating study in the psychology of a small team. There was just three of us, and we established a new level of trust in what the three of us can do and a ability to retreat. Hey, dude, I'm not doing any more business analysis. It's all you, baby. And so that I think is what you're saying, is that
yeah.
putting the responsibility where it belongs really felt good.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to wrap this up,
Yeah.
ju I had the technical judgment to look at that 188 page spec, decompose it into some reasonable chunks of
Yeah, yeah.
scoped boundaries of sub applications, if you will. which allowed that was my judgment, my limited
Yeah.
judgment and taste and how I contributed. It got started. But now with that basic framework in place, our colleague, our business colleague, was able to flush it out and add the business taste and judgment. Now what we have is a very credible and outstanding
I know.
looking application. So let's continue.
Okay. Yeah.
Tell me
Let's
some more of the things. What does a listener have to think about as they use coding agents? What may not work as expected? Where are some of the gaps, John?
Well, you're testing me because 'cause I'm such a positive guy. Give me a hint. Is there are you trying to, force,
No, no.
trying to re
So I'll
you do
lead the
what?
discussion a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so the these coding agents are fantastic at creating a very sophisticated demo.
That's
The
right.
thing that a business user can't necessarily do, and we wouldn't expect them to do, is to understand how to secure the application,
Yeah.
how to connect it to an identity book of record, how to log in using Facebook or log in using Google or log in using GitHub. So the quote enterprise grade capabilities that we in IT technology take for granted may be out of scope. Out of the expectation of a business user to have that expertise is probably unreasonable. So enterprise grade capabilities still that's the thing that is required to cross the river from demo and MVP perhaps to production application.
Yeah.
That's where the two-person team, or at
Yeah.
least if you have a business user who is that sophisticated, they know the tech, that's wonderful. Very few times have I ever seen that. So it's a knowledge of there you go.
So this is the Agentic Mesh book that you wrote, and with the, under the premise, and you can correct it, but dude, if we're gonna go into the enterprise, there's a bunch of things I've spent a career doing for hundreds of projects over your career, and you put it in a book. And I think that was a necessary for you to get it all on paper so that everybody that came from the generation we did can see that we care. We genuinely care about all of these components that we've all grown up learning. You know, we started in technology for with the first computer, right? The first personal computer. So we get why it's important to do all these enterprise things. And those don't necessarily come yet. Yet is the always the word in coding frameworks. And today we talked about them as part of the harness and part of the other things, the other layers and abstraction. But it's always a question of yet. And what do you do now to take advantage of those enterprise features? And sorry, I didn't mean to get into an advertisement for your book, but I think for people that of a certain experience level will say, "Hey, man, thanks for putting it all on paper, like writing it all down." So
Well, well, first off, thank you.
yeah,
Just to reiterate, so the things that a business user would not necessarily know, and these are things in the book, but
yeah,
like obviously
federated,
the app.
yeah, federated identity, man. It's like a thing that why would a business person care? Why would they even use those two words together? Federated
You got it.
identity.
You you got it. Role-based access control,
Role-based access
discoverability,
control. Yes.
observability. How do I find out what the thing's doing? And how do I have audit logs so I can actually figure out how to diagnose a problem when it actually does happen? Anyway, long story short, I think the key word you said, and I think is so true, is the skills and capabilities may not be there yet, but they will be. Now, here's
Bingo.
the thing.
So
Today, we
let's
probably have to have a
y
tech and a business user together. Tomorrow, maybe the business user will be able to say, agent, fill in all the security holes, fill in the observability, make this thing discoverable, blah, 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 all that stuff. Maybe not today, but soon I think it will happen.
well, and here's how I think about it, 'cause, we talk about this company of one a lot here in the everywhere, but in particular here in the, Bay Area, but there's something about having a small community, even if it's just the 3 of us in our little community for our stealth project, sharing the cognitive load, sharing the journey. is actually part of the fun. And so I I hope we don't get to companies of one because I think that's a very lonely world we would be living in. I think we need to think about, yeah, we don't all have to be part of a 600,000 person company. We can actually be part of a 3 or a 5-person company, and that is our small community and our the products we build with others that are in small communities like that, and it's a much better vision, I think. And sorry, I'm getting into I don't know what I'm getting into some philosophical, economical view of the future, but I think that what will be true and important is that we all bring different s- uh, experiences to a company or a product. And I think that diversity of points of view will always be valuable. I think the question is, not do we get to one, but what is what's the right size company for the problem you're trying to solve or the product you're trying to build? Sorry, I treat them the same thing because I live in software land, but they're not the same thing. Anyway.
No, well, I think actually that might be a good wrapping up point
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
let's move on.
we've been at it for a little while here. I think we've actually drained this.
Yes.
So hopefully our listeners rather, will recognize the fact that these coding agents are here. They are ready for prime time. Still a few things to think through, but I would just say this: if you're not seriously considering or at least using these things today, I think you're missing a huge opportunity.
Yes, and I want to, put a plug in there for my future business of creating hackathons for every company on the planet. I think we need to do that, Eric. I'll put a little, idea tag on that. Anyway, thank you, Eric, and thanks for listening. Like us, subscribe, tell your friends. We'd like to talk more, and, thanks for listening.